Hey everyone, welcome to Podcast with Marcel. I just want to say before we get started with this episode that Hayes has no idea what's going on, and he's going to find out. And I did all of this work on my own. So if Hayes seems confused at any point, that's what's happening.
That's just the norm. If Hayes seems confused at any point, yeah.
Space. I reckon that's a lonely place to call home for two travel-weary bluegrass astronauts. But between the long shifts of fishing for hydrocarbon in the lakes of Saturn's moon Titan, there's just enough time to get some picking in. So hush up your mug and fetch a jug of Lunarshine while you can join us in the loneliest honky-tonk this side of the Appalachian supercluster. By God, here she is a-coming. A new transmission of Podcast with Marcel, featuring Hayes Griffin.
Hey Hayes, how you doing, man?
I am doing great, Marcel. How about yourself, buddy?
I'm good, man. It's nice to catch up after work. Listen, I wanted to ask you, do you know anything about the bar that I'm taking you to tonight?
Ooh, unfortunately, no, I don't.
That's all right, man. So it's called the Pig Pen. It's right up here, and the bartender is super cool. His name's JD, and I have one thing I got to ask of you, and that's whatever you do, just be cool. I really don't want you to embarrass me in front of JD, all right?
Okay, man, I'll try.
All right, man. All right, let's go for it. So let's just walk up. Let's order some drinks. Let's just be cool, okay?
You got it.
Can I get you boys anything to drink?
Yeah, listen, JD, can I just do like a Miller Lite? Hayes, what do you want?
Oh, man. What kind of IPAs do they got? I need an IPA, man. That's what I need.
Ooh, they normally only have one IPA on tap. JD, do you have an IPA right now?
Sorry, boys. Just tapped a keg on that one.
Anything else we can get you, man?
I guess I'll have the same thing as you, dude. That sounds easy enough.
All right, JD, let's make that 2 Millers.
Coming right up.
All right, let's just go sit down. That was cool. I think JD likes us. That was fine.
I thought I screwed that up, dude, with the IPA, but...
No, it's cool. It's just like, this is kind of like a sports bar, man. Like, they don't do a lot of IPAs. Like, that's not their thing. You know what I'm saying?
Sorry, man. Sorry. I'm used to hanging out with college boys, you know?
Anyway, dude, what have you been playing lately?
I've been playing a lot of Grisman stuff, you know? Been going back through the Mule Skinner album and kind of like digging deep, you know what I mean? Back into that kind of stuff, checking out some of David's breaks off of that TV show, but yeah, man.
I'm not smart enough for that. I feel like I listen to a lot of that and I just can't follow what's going on, and then I have to study it, and then I feel like I've missed the point.
Hey, I mean, that's what I do. I guess we're in the same boat.
I've been listening to a bunch of Newgrass Revival, although you know that because I sent you the artwork that I was just working on.
I was wondering about that. That's some pretty tasty looking artwork. Obviously, yeah, you know, graphic designer extraordinaire, Marcel.
It's great because I'll never be able to do anything with it. It'll just be maybe a T-shirt for myself. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a poster.
I mean, I got to have a T-shirt if that's the case, man. You can't let me in on the secret like that and then just keep it all for yourself.
That's true. I do need to print like 3 now for the people that I showed them to.
Just to keep us quiet so we don't turn you into Sam Bush or whatever, you know?
Anyway, man, I wanted to talk to you about hippies.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Get your tinfoil hat on for this bluegrass conspiracy theory.
Who are you talking to? Anyway, what I was saying is that hippies saved bluegrass, right?
In a way, yeah.
But they also killed bluegrass. Let me tell you why. We know bluegrass started in 1945, let's say. You know, anything before that is not bluegrass. If that confuses you, there's a ton of videos about it, and I've made most of them.
Yeah, there's a great channel I know of on YouTube where you can get yourself educated.
Of course, we hit, like, you know, the 1950s, and, you know, someone invents rock and roll, right? Because that just happened right in, like, January 1950.
Immediately.
And bluegrass is immediately, like, almost ready to die, yeah?
Absolutely.
We get really rough times through the 1950s. And then what saves bluegrass? Well, it's the folk revival of the 1960s, right? And who was leading the charge, Hayes?
Them IPA drinking college kids.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is that it worked. I mean, you get like Flatt and Scruggs touring a bunch of colleges, but ultimately it's the hippies that kind of like ruined everything about traditionalism, which is funny because I feel like that's not something that hippies are known for, in that like hippies are like a very like liberal mindset and like a liberal hub. And so the fact that they would like take on a genre like bluegrass and they would say like conserve, preserve, keep it the way it was, seems weird. Seems like the opposite of what they would do, but that's exactly what they did. The hippies like wrote all the books. They like, they codified everything that was bluegrass. They bottled it up, they labeled it, and they sold it on a shelf. No one did that before. I feel like that's mind-blowing to me, and no one ever wants to talk about that. Everyone wants to talk about all the good aspects of the folk revival. I mean, I guess this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory. Ultimately, it was good that it happened because we still have bluegrass, but it is a bummer that the genre became kind of academic so fast, because when genres become academic, they die.
That's kind of absolutely 100% true.
Like, what happened to like jazz music in like universities, right? We started having like jazz programs, and then jazz, I'm not saying jazz is dead, but like it kind of is. It's kind of like a legacy genre.
I mean, buddy, there were people. So I went to NEC, New England Conservatory, from 2010 to 2012 in this program called Contemporary Improvisation. And that program was originally called Third Stream, and was kind of developed in the like 70s as a response to academics already thinking that jazz was dead as a result of it being incorporated into the academy. There were counter movements like jazz. We had just moved into like, Miles Davis had just recorded Bitches Brew, and then people are like, jazz is dead because of college. You know what I mean? So yeah.
And it's kind of true.
You're onto something. Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's 100% true.
Yeah. So I think that for bluegrass, that same moment is Pete Seeger writing the banjo book. And then I think it's kind of over.
Pete, why?
And of course it's not over. People kept recording and playing bluegrass. But the point is that it had been bottled up and labeled. Like, bluegrass was never given a chance to evolve. Imagine like any other genre. Imagine rock and roll or funk or whatever you like. And imagine that genre is only 15 years old. And someone's like, all right, well, we can't change it from here. Let's remember it like this because this is the way it always has to be. That's what the hippies did to bluegrass. Bluegrass was only like 15 years old. And someone already was like, no, let's codify it. Let's label it. Let's make it this thing. It has to be this way. It can't change anymore. And that's awful. I mean, jazz got way longer.
Yeah.
Jazz got half a decade.
Exactly, yeah. Jazz.
Or half a century, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Jazz at least had, like you said, 50 years of, letting its wings spread into, bebop and hard bop and all that kind of stuff before it was, taken out into a field and shot.
No one wants to attribute it to hippies, though, which I don't understand either. I feel like everyone's real reluctant to say that, but there you go. That's kind of what happened.
I would agree with you on that one. And also, nobody wants to, like, attribute... The hippies didn't stay hippies forever. You know what I mean? I feel like the fact that they codified this thing, like, kind of what you're talking about, right? The fact that it was codified by college people and academics and stuff like that in the 60s was like the prelude to what the hippies were going to grow into later. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they didn't just stay hippies, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It very quickly became a business run by ex-hippies.
Yeah, I mean, that store in Nashville down there by the Station Inn, Two Old Hippies, it looks pretty clean for a store run by two old hippies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's interesting, too, because you keep hearing about, as we get older, we keep passing through more and more generations where people are saying things about so-and-so killed bluegrass, or this killed bluegrass, or that killed bluegrass. And I don't think any of them are as harsh a nail in the coffin as that moment, which also saved bluegrass and took all of the evolution out of it at the same time.
We're kind of like putting ourselves almost in a catch-22 thing, right? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
did it save bluegrass if it prevented it from growing into anything else, or did it? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's my brain's kind of getting twisted in two a little bit, just trying to reconcile that.
You know, and some of the recent videos that I put out that inspired, mass controversy in the comment section. I got one really good comment that has stuck with me, and it was an angry comment too. It was a very critical comment, and the premise of it is, why does bluegrass have to be pulled kicking and screaming into the next century? And I thought, man, of all the responses that I got where people were like, no, you missed the point. This is bluegrass, or that's bluegrass, or all these other little things that people said, that was kind of the best criticism. It was like, why are you so worried about keeping bluegrass alive, about pulling bluegrass along? If it's going to make it, if it's going to make it. If it's not, it's not. Why are we so worried about preservation? And like, as try as I might, that's a hard argument to like, that's hard to like say something back to that. It's kind of a good point.
I got nothing. I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah. So, part of me is like, oh yeah, it's important for the genres to evolve. Let the genres change. People can do whatever they want. Musicians can do whatever they want. They're not boxed in by the term bluegrass or something. For instance, everything that Sierra Hull records, it doesn't have to be called a bluegrass album. It can just be her album, right? She happens to be most well known as a bluegrass musician, but doesn't mean she has to record bluegrass. And I think that by labeling everything she records as bluegrass, we are pulling bluegrass kicking and screaming into the 2000s, when maybe what's the point, right? Maybe we should let the term just degrade and, mean less and less of the specific.
I had a great conversation the other night with one of my buddies from college. He's a great jazz saxophonist from Columbus named Hayden Huffman. And he was kind of having this same kind of, it's hard not to draw the correlations between bluegrass and jazz in this way, right? Because they do have like similar trajectories. And a lot of current jazz musicians, Hayden was kind of talking me through this, a lot of current popular jazz musicians that are kind of the Sierra Hulls of the jazz world. These people who grew up in the tradition, but are maybe expanding the boundaries of what that box used to contain. They don't call it jazz.
Yeah.
They call it contemporary improvised music, or any of this kind of stuff, because they see this, this kind of point that you're bringing up here, and they're like, we don't care about this term jazz. In fact, the box is too small. It's this weird pejorative thing. You know what I mean? Like we want nothing to do with that. So like
yeah. The other thing that comes up a lot is people saying, hey, all these other genres have subgenres, and some of them are really useful. You're right. There are some really useful like subgenre categorization to like understand how music works and has evolved. But I don't think any of those really work for bluegrass because, or at least the majority of them don't work for bluegrass because we haven't seen like massive movements. For instance, like the space grass thing, the David Grisman or dog music. I mean, if you want to talk about how many artists really recorded that, who do we have? We have David Grisman. We have the Tony Rice Unit. We have like a tiny little bit of Mark O'Connor. We have...
Well, you're talking about, like, sorry to cut you off, but you're talking about pretty much everyone who was in the David Grisman
was originally in the band. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So is that enough for it to be a subgenre? I mean, everyone treats it like it is, but it's not a ton of recorded material. It's not like a ton of different bands, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like David Grisman brings on Grappelli, so like Tony leaves. Mark O'Connor starts a fight with someone. Mark O'Connor leaves, right? Like, we don't. I don't know. We just don't see enough to, I think, really establish a subgenre that means something. And the same goes for something like newgrass, right? We're just talking about newgrass revival too. There are some people that think that newgrass just refers to anything that's progressive and bluegrass, but there's other people that think newgrass refers to this very specific like 80s, bluegrass. Pop crossover kind of stuff, which also feels like super limiting, is like a really big box to be like, oh yeah, it's like pop bluegrass from the 80s. Well, like, how can you make newgrass music if that's what it is, right?
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah, you're just essentially talking about newgrass revival cover bands or something at that point, right?
Yeah.
So.
And once again, like, when you ask people what newgrass is, the biggest example they have is newgrass revival, which doesn't make for a great subgenre.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I guess, like, Yeah, what are we talking? If we were to call that, like qualify that subgenre, it's like sometimes you put some island beats in there. Sometimes you play something that sounds like a pop country tune. Sometimes you let your banjo player write a tune in 11 that has 400 different sections, and 800 different chords. Like, yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's weird if you're describing what's supposed to be a subgenre and instead you're just describing one band. I think it means that the subgenre system doesn't work.
Yeah. Agreed.
So maybe the only one that's actually useful to me is progressive bluegrass, which is so broad as to be not useful, right? There's so many things that could fall into progressive bluegrass that I guess it is a useful label to say, like, hey, if you're expecting bluegrass, this is kind of it. But we're pushing boundaries. But Twisted Pine and Punch Brothers would both fall under the label of progressive bluegrass, and they're completely different. One of those bands sticks to the instrumentation, the other one doesn't. There's just so many differences between two bands like that would fall into the same subgenre,
Absolutely. Yeah. What do we do? What do we do, Marcel?
I don't know what the solution is, but I find the conversation really interesting, and I hope that people who listen to my opinions on the matter don't get sucked into this idea that I'm some kind of traditionalist, because I'm really not. The majority of bluegrass that I listen to isn't traditional bluegrass. I think you listen to way more traditional bluegrass than I do.
I would, based upon the conversations we've had in the past, I would probably agree with you on that one, that I do listen to more. And that's weird, right? Because the funny thing is, I think you and I, even though we may have different listening habits, I think we still have probably a very similar kind of general overview and opinion on this issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm not a traditionalist either. Like, my favorite kind of bluegrass is probably the first generation stuff, which is like, for most progressive people, that's like a red flag. They're like, oh God, here we go. This guy's going to give me a lecture about, no dobro in bluegrass or something like that. But no way, man. If I'm listening to bluegrass, I listen to way more first generation stuff. But if I'm listening to music in general, I'm listening to crazy stuff. You know what I mean? Twisted Pine is probably the most conservative of the things that I'm trying to explore at this point,
Right.
That bluegrass flute.
That bluegrass flute. That's what I need, man. If you haven't listened to Twisted Pine, go listen to them. They're great. I think the funniest thing about this, just to take it all the way back to the hippies, is that now I feel like the hippie movement and bluegrass is trying to tear down the traditionalism, right? And they're trying to say no, let's break through boundaries. Let's, Billy Strings is tearing down walls of traditionalism. He's doing new things with bluegrass. Isn't that great? Let's do jamgrass. Let's do this. And really, the work that they're undoing is the work that was done by previous hippies.
When you phrase it that way, that's hard to argue with, man. That's seriously, let me see if I can lay this out for you again. Hopefully this isn't too redundant, but it's so the kind of full circle moment that we just had is bluegrass is a thing. Bluegrass starts in 1945-ish, moves forward. By the 1960s, we've codified it into some genre, and the people who codified it were college people, right?
Yeah.
Professors, hippies, students, all that kind of stuff. They are the ones who, in fact, put bluegrass in the box. Bill Monroe was not the guy that put bluegrass in the box, right?
Yeah.
So then, fast forward 40 years, the people who were left-leaning, crazy, progressive folks in the 1960s are in fact the ones who turned this into kind of a conservative movement.
Yeah.
And I don't want, it's hard to stay away from political leanings with this kind of thing, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a socially kind of conservative movement. And then modern hippies, in their plight to fight the man or whatever, go out to undo this set of traditional things, right? That had been codified essentially by their forebears.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Oh man, I went to college for this crap, and I'm getting schooled today. I like this, man. Yo, dude, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, back from my time on the road, and I've got this really weird story about Robert Plant.
Got your ears on? This is another story from the road.
Yeah, dude. So I was touring back, and this must have been 2015 or 2014 with April Verge.
Yeah.
And we were doing this tour in England. And it's kind of there's not really an equivalent for this thing in the U.S., but they have this circuit of folk houses. And I'm talking like town halls, like village halls that are like funded by the local governments that like put up money to like pay foreign acts to come through and play music. Isn't that like a wild concept? Your like local government funding that kind of thing.
So it's like a house concert, like one of those house shows, but with more bureaucracy.
Absolutely. Which is like, doesn't that sound like the most British thing you've ever heard?
Look, if we can insert bureaucracy into anything, by God, we should do it.
So we were playing this series of little village gigs like this. And to be, like before I go any further, it sounded like I was knocking it. It was great. It was an awesome time, like, meeting these, because it's really like playing the small, like VFW hall circuit or something like that if you're in the States, you know what I mean? Only there's just, like you said, more bureaucracy. But we get to this one, and each one is cool. They're way cooler than American, like VFW halls, because there's a nice little bar at the back and all this kind of stuff. And me and April are standing backstage, and I'm like getting warmed up, you know what I mean? Like getting ready to play our like awesome show to the 15 people that had showed up that night or whatever.
Totally.
And I'm looking out, and at the back of the hall, there's this bar, like I said, and some dude in like fry boots and like real tight jeans, with like long flowing locks is like, his back is to me and he's like leaning over the bar, clearly ordering a beer. And I like jokingly, I like turned over to April. I was like, oh, better turn it on tonight, April. Looks like we got Robert Plant in the house out there. And she turns back to me. She's like, well, I didn't want to say anything to you because I thought it would make you nervous, but the promoter just came up to me and said that Robert Plant's here tonight. And I was like, no, shit.
So that's like confirmation Robert Plant would win a Robert Plant lookalike contest.
Yeah, I didn't even need to see the dude's face. You know what I mean? And like, no joke, like 30 seconds later, he turns around and grabs a seat at the back of the auditorium with his wife. And there's this kind of beautiful set of windows at the back. And I'm like, what the hell is Robert Plant doing here? You know what I mean? Like, why is there literally, like, no joke, it was like a 15 to 20 person kind of turnout for this gig. And
he loves folk music, though.
He does. And that's kind of what the promoter said. And he was like, oh, yeah, look out the windows there. Do you see that house? And there's like, I mean, probably 500 yards of just open
lightning strikes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Someone plays a minor chord on an organ.
And then, like, seriously, across the leagues of open field, there's a mansion there. And he's like, yeah, that's one of Robert Plant's houses. He just, like, kind of walked down here. Sometimes he'll come check out what's going on.
Of course. Yes. That's so funny. One time I was hanging out with a friend and his girlfriend. I don't know if they were dating yet, but we were doing the Robert Plant, like, baby, 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 baby. And I don't know, we were drinking, we were just joking about that. And my friend's girlfriend was like, what is this? What is this joke? What are you talking about? And my buddy's like, oh, that's Robert Plant. He like pulls up a picture on his phone. It's like, yeah, is that like the guy from Led Zeppelin? And she goes, oh, isn't that guy that sings with Alison Krauss? It blew my mind. It blew my mind that someone could only know Robert Plant from like his later career and not know that he was in Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
It's shocking. I mean, there's nothing wrong with like not knowing things. Like, everyone's got to learn something at some point. That's fine. Yeah. But it's just surprising because Led Zeppelin is so ubiquitous,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like our generation, every one of our dads forced us to listen to Led Zeppelin, at least like at some point in our childhood. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think I said those exact words in a video. I said all of our fathers listened to Led Zeppelin. You know whose father didn't listen to Led Zeppelin, though, is my wife's father.
KJ's dad, not on the Led Zeppelin train, huh?
No, he was really into like Rush and The Who and stuff, but he did not like Led Zeppelin. He's told me this before. Actually, one time, me and KJ were in a restaurant, and I have trouble hearing music in restaurants sometimes. And she was like, man, I feel like we've been listening to this, this stupid, song forever. And, I try to tune in and catch what it is. And I hear that it's Led Zeppelin. And I hear that it's also Moby Dick, and it's the beginning of Moby Dick. Which is like, a 20-minute drum solo, right? And I turned to KJ and I was like, this is going to get like a lot worse before it gets better.
Sorry, I don't think that's the radio edit playing up there on the speakers, babe, right?
Who has a restaurant and is like, yeah, we're going to listen to 20 minutes of John Bonham, just like go for it. You know, set down the drumsticks and play the drum set with his hands and stuff. Like, who puts that on for background music at your restaurant?
Mood music.
Did you listen to a lot of Led Zeppelin or play a lot of those riffs growing up?
I was super into Led Zeppelin. I was like, I can't even really say before I was like a bluegrass guitar player, because really, it was like concurrent. You know what I mean? I started playing guitar when I was 8. It was like Gordon Lightfoot stuff for like 2 years, because that's what my guitar teacher knew at the time. Then I got my new guitar teacher, and classic rock, like all the way. You know what I mean? I was like head first into like, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC. You know what I mean? I learned every like legendary riff and all that kind of stuff. And it was during that period that I fell in love with bluegrass. So like I kind of fostered both of them at the same time. Yeah.
Do you think you started with Gordon Lightfoot because you're slightly closer to Canada than me?
Maybe, you know? I mean, it's only a lake separates Ohio from Ontario. You know what I mean? So, like, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
That would make a lot of sense.
Like, you have one of those Ghostbuster, like, reading things, and as you get closer to Canada, like, the Lightfoot meter just starts going crazy.
Yeah, exactly. You got to put your radioactive suit on, you know what I mean, when you get up there by the border.
Dude, number one, I didn't take guitar lessons, so that was a miss for me. So I missed out on having some dude teach me like every classic rock riff. But I did learn, you know, a good amount of them on my own. I feel like I had a Led Zeppelin phase, but I didn't have like the people around me to make it happen. I remember being in like 8th grade trying to start my first band and being like, let's play, you know, Good Times, Bad Times. I was playing drums at the time. I just really wanted to do like the double kick thing. Yeah, I remember like trying to play that with my friends, and my friends weren't great musicians. I was like the only one that could play the part from the record. And like looking back on it, it's like Led Zeppelin. That was probably a miss for me to be like, all right, 8th graders, let's go. But
ambition, though. I like your ambition.
if it had been, you know, if everyone had jumped on board for that and been really into, you know, covering Led Zeppelin, I feel like that would have really encouraged me. I would have done more of it. But because that didn't happen, I feel like I moved on a little bit. I got into Rush.
Isn't that funny? Like, you mentioned this before that, like, you know, KJ's dad wasn't so much into Zeppelin, but he liked Rush and, like, these prog rock kind of bands. And to me, that was always interesting because I didn't, like, necessarily lump them all together, but I was always under the assumption, because I liked both of those types of bands, it's like it wasn't one or the other. It was like, you know, anyone playing a, you know, Les Paul through a Marshall stack was like, you know, was chill with one another.
But don't you hear your dad? Like, at least my dad does. My dad talks trash about, like, bands that I consider, like, kind of related. You know, my dad obviously likes classic rock. He grew up listening to all those bands. But, like, he hates Kansas, you know?
Interesting.
And,
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know, in my mind, I listen to him, and I'm like, all right, yeah, maybe Kansas is, like, a little more poppy or something, or, like, maybe there's something cheesy about the organ or something. I don't know what it is, but my dad, like, hates Kansas and can immediately identify it, but then, you know, likes these other bands. It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, now that we were talking about, like, Rush and Zeppelin and stuff, like, I've definitely heard my dad is not a Rush fan, you know, or anything that would be in that, like, prog rock kind of zone from that point in time. Yes, or any of those kind of guys, you know. It's like if it takes 12 minutes to plow through one track, he's out, you know, unless it's Moby Dick.
Yeah, right. That really to the whole thing. I guess growing up with it must be different, though, because, like, Rush's first album is basically like a Led Zeppelin copy album, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I imagine that coming out and you, like, buying the first Rush album and being like, oh, I don't like these guys. They're ripping off my favorite band. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you might feel like that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I don't like Rush. They sound just like Greta Van Fleet.
Oh, man. If we're going to talk about Greta Van Fleet, so, like, I was managing a radio station in Michigan, like, where Greta Van Fleet is from. You know what I mean? And it was a AAA station, so theoretically should be interested in, like, supporting local acts and playing, like, you know what I mean? But, oh, man, when Greta Van Fleet came out, there was, like, it was like the Red Sea parting in terms of, like, the programmers at the station who were, like, pro-Greta and, like, anti-Greta. I think the anti-Greta fans were definitely, you know, more numerous. Because, I mean, our station also, it was like an eclectic format, right? They wanted to hear, like, Ornette Coleman and crap like that on air. So Greta Van Fleet, it was like, no way, you know? just Led Zeppelin copies. Do you hear it? You know?
Yes. My wife did not care for Greta Van Fleet. We were watching this, like, you know, we got on our phones to like stream something to the TV, and we saw that Metallica was like having a live concert. And I was like, oh, let's like watch this. And it turns out to be, you know, just a bunch of like interviews with people being like, oh yeah, Metallica's charity is like so great. You know, it's wonderful how many people they're helping. And that may be true, but all I can think of is how Metallica took Napster away from us.
Oh, man. Well, yeah, I've never gotten over that one. I was like actively using Napster when that whole saga happened, and like definitely had downloaded all of Metallica's albums off of Napster back then.
It's a mess. Anyway, so Greta Van Fleet opened, and and my wife was digging in real hard on their outfits. Yeah. And the funny thing is that, you know, she's just like digging in about like how not cool they look, like how not like, you know, sexy and hip is this thing. Like they kind of just look ridiculous. And I was like, you know, come on, you know, like Jimmy Page used to dress like a wizard, and like, you know, Freddie Mercury used to wear that checkered jumpsuit. You know, I'm like, you know, bands have dressed like this before. And then we're pulling up pictures of all the like, you know, Led Zeppelin and Queen and stuff. And every time I look at the picture, I'm like, oh yeah, that's sick. And then I look at the TV and I'm like, no. like you missed somehow, right? Like everyone's done what you're doing, but like, man, Freddie Mercury just looks great in the leotard and you don't. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, maybe the lack of groundbreaking choices or something. Yeah, who knows, right?
I don't know. And it is, you know, not that I absolutely hate them or what they're doing or anything, but there is something that's like a little karaoke about it or something, or like Halloween dress up or something.
People had this argument too when, I'm blanking on the name of the band. They did Believe in a Thing Called Love.
The Darkness.
The Darkness. When they came out, people kind of like went on this same train, right? You know what I mean? How they were just like rip-offs. And
The Darkness got away with it. Maybe that's because they're actually British. You know, Greta Van Fleet is from England by way of Michigan, and maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, it's not British enough. We're coming full circle on a lot of issues here today. You know what I mean?
Could be more British. I was talking with a student about this. Apparently, Stash had a video where he was talking about putting like modal fiddle tunes into other modes.
Oh, yes. I have done this. I haven't heard Stash talk about it, but I would love to hear him talk about it.
The first thing, you know, a student just said it to me in a lesson, and immediately I was like, all right, you know, what if I played Red Haired Boy and Lydian Dominant? And like, it's like the first thing that I did. It's pretty wild. It's actually a really pretty moment in that too. If you listen to...
Give it to me.
Yeah. Isn't that pretty?
Oh, yeah.
Right, instead of... it's like not the chord you expect. Instead of a C chord, it would have to be an A major chord, which is so weird.
Yeah.
If you did dominant, or if you did...
Yeah.
If you just normal Lydian, you'd have like an F sharp in there. Either way, it works out really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like Lydian stuff. John McGann, my old teacher, was real into doing that thing, which is maybe where Stash got some of the ideas. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of like Lydian Dominant on that last one though. Keep that flat 7 in there, baby.
Yeah, right. It's almost like you just continue like alter just like one more note. It's like we got the flat 7 already. What if we just had like a sharp 4?
Oh man.
A really interesting sound too. If you're not familiar with like modes, Lydian is basically just a major scale, but whatever the 4th degree would be is raised by a half step. It's got a sharp 4. And you know Lydian even if you think you don't, because it's in like every movie and TV theme.
Yeah, if you want anything like dreamy or celestial sounding or whatever, it's like, right? And isn't the Simpsons theme song Lydian?
Yeah, is Lydian, yeah. So here's C major. Here's C Lydian. Here's Simpsons.
Yeah. Exactly.
Another one is Back to the Future. not this part, but that beginning part is in Lydian, for sure.
Yeah, and you managed to hit one of my favorite, like, G chords of all time with that, too. You know what I mean? Just that, like, low G note on the low E string, you know what I mean, with your C sharp on the B string there.
Yeah.
Choice.
Crazy sound. Yeah, and then Zelda, Ocarina of Time.
Yep.
The first theme. So on and so forth. But that one, I mean, the B part isn't really in Lydian, but the A part really feels like it's in F Lydian.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure if I actually have any more examples. This might be all the ones I can play off the top of my head. I don't know if you have another one.
I lose my my card on this one or whatever because The Simpsons was the only one I was like, yeah, Simpsons, Lydian. That's it.
That's the one. Yeah. No, it is like you hear it a lot though. You know, I recognize it now. I didn't always, but I recognize it now when I hear it in like movies and shows because it's just like a very spicy particular sound.
There were a couple profs that I had in school that were kind of like, they encouraged us to like listen to those kinds of songs and try and attach like feelings to them, you know what I mean? So like Lydian definitely evokes a certain feeling for me. Like I said, that kind of like celestial or open, airy kind of thing, you know, the having that leading tone to the fifth or whatever kind of deal. Like, because it's a leading tone toward the dominant sound, which is like an unresolved sound. So it leaves you open and hanging and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, totally. It kind of has like it has that like ethereal kind of sound or like experimenting kind of sound. And then it potentially has like a reckless sound too, which I guess is part of that, you know, kind of like whimsical thing. Like you're unsure of what's going to happen. That's, you know, I guess emotionally kind of similar to Reckless. I think the arranging around it will make it feel one way or the other. Yeah,
I mean, like the Simpsons theme song to me is like the perfect example of like the curated chaos kind of sound for Lydian. You know, I feel like that theme song was developed for Bart Simpson.
Yeah, right. If Danny Elfman didn't write the Simpsons theme, he would have written the exact same thing if asked.
Yep.
What are some other modal fiddle tunes?
You know, there's a huge catalog of Mixolydian tunes in Bluegrass and, you know, old time and all that stuff. Your June Apples and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I actually ordered a T-shirt. I made a design that's just the Nickelodeon font, but it just says Mixolydian, and it's got like the orange color around it.
Oh, we just go ahead and put my address on that first shipment there. I'm into that, baby. Not only am I a Nickelodeon kid, but
I thought that's pretty funny.
Dude, I was listening to Sirius XM one time, and they had Alan Mundy on there. You know, Ned Luberecki does his like Sunday banjo kind of show on there. Alan kept calling, I don't know if he was doing it on purpose just to mess with folks or if he actually was saying it this way, but he kept calling it the Mixolydian mode.
You know, I've seen some people say it like that, and I've never asked or like clarified or anything. It's like, did someone actually teach it that way? I've always heard Mixolydian.
Same here. And like, that almost makes me wonder if we should go back to that T-shirt design.
Mixolydian.
Yeah. Anyways.
Mixolydian. Yeah. What was the word I used in that video? And you said that that should be the title of the video or something?
Oh.
I said tetrachord.
Tetrachord, yep. Neon tetrachord.
I remember reading about those in a... It's funny because, you know, Hayes went to music school and I didn't. In preparation for not going to music school, I went to my high school music teachers and I asked them if they had any of their textbooks from college. And they loaned me, I don't know, maybe like 15 books. And there was, I think it was like you probably read out of this book too. It's like the 20th Century Tonal Harmony. You know that book?
It's on the shelf behind me.
It was my choir teachers. Shout out to Mrs. S. And I feel like that's where I learned about tetrachords.
I believe that is also where I learned about tetrachords. Like it's a conspiracy, man. Like that's the only book pushing tetrachords actually never existed, but the authors of 20th century tonal harmony.
Yeah, I was reading out of like copy from like the 80s. I had like the dated info.
Oh yeah, mine was from the early 2000s, and I've even seen a newer edition at the school now. But yeah,
Music theory
tetrachords.
keeps changing. They keep finding new musical advancements, and they need to update the textbook.
Yeah, it's actually all about graphic scores now. You know what I mean? They don't even use standard notation anymore. It's like, what does this curved line mean to you?
Have you seen some of those the like YouTube channels where they transcribe like crazy solos? Have you seen some of the ones where like it's a crazy trumpet solo and they just ditch all formal notation? They just got the real squiggly line up top. It's so funny.
That's great, dude. I mean, no joke. I'm kind of joking about this, but like, when I was in grad school, like that was what that program was like founded on. You know what I mean? Like doing that kind of stuff. Yeah, just like looking at jagged lines on graph paper and playing them somehow, I definitely scoffed at it. I scoff at it less these days, but I didn't know what to make of that as a 22-year-old human being.
I feel like we played a piece in a high school band that was like that, where the whole percussion ensemble split up, and the music had like 5 patterns for different extra percussion instruments, and you got to decide where you enter and exit on your particular pattern. It's like 16 bars of just like exotic drum sounds where you filter in and out, and it never worked. I like looking back on it now, it sounds really interesting. I'm like, oh, what a neat thing to write as a composer. But then, getting a bunch of like 16-year-olds together to do it, it never worked.
I mean, if I'm going to be quite honest, it barely worked with a bunch of highly trained 22-year-olds when I was watching it in grad school. I mean, and that's not to say that it can't work. Like, people who are into that scene, you know what I mean?
They nail it, yeah.
Yeah, but it's just like anything, right? Like if you hand an 18-year-old kid a fiddle tune half the time and tell them to do something with it, they don't know what to do.
Seems like the boys might be wrapping this one up. You two mind breaking the fourth wall and telling the folks where they can find you online?
Yes, sir, JD. You can find me online at youtube.com/Hayes Griffin or hayesgriffin.com.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm Marcel. You can find me at lessonswithmarcel.com, Lessons with Marcel on YouTube. And that's about it. Y'all have a good one.